Well, thank you, Paige. Thank you for those polls that help me to understand who we have here today. So, hello, hardworking managers and board members. Thank you for joining our webinar today when we'll be breaking down the Reserve Studies funding plan. So, based on your feedback last year, we prepared this series of 4 breaking down webinars. It started with breaking down and providing insights to the overall process, then Reserve Study document itself, and then how the expenses are all identified. And finally today, the 4th and final portion of this 4-part series, we break down the funding plan for you. Now, reserves are all about helping you prepare to accomplish the major repair and replacement projects at your association in a timely manner. So it's all a matter of providing the income to pay for those anticipated expenses. It's really that simple. Well, it's that simply stated. In our last webinar, we showed you what projects qualify as expenses and the process of making all those estimates. If you missed any of those prior webinars, you can watch them on YouTube or find links to them on our website. So today, knowing those projects are going to occur and knowing how expensive they'll be, we're going to talk about funding. But even though it is simply stated, there are many nuances involved in getting it right for you and your association. So settle in and let me take you on a journey through the process of developing a funding plan. This is the outline we'll follow for today's program. I'll familiarize you with the tools, rules, and goals, so you'll then have the working knowledge to be able to follow me successfully through some actual examples. So starting with the tools and the rules, the foundation for the funding plan are the tools to be used, and then the rules that provide the guidance. This is the foundation for everything else that we're going to speak about in today's program. The tools are the methods by which the funding plan is calculated, and it's just math, but I'll show you there are 2 very different approaches to attacking the problem of finding out how much money to set aside for upcoming projects. And just a reminder, you see that asterisk there. How those projects are identified was our last webinar, and it's now available on our website or on YouTube. So if we want to do some catching up, it's very easy to do that. Now, those tools are just math, but I want to point out that there's 2 different ways to look at it for exactly the same projects, okay? And again, another asterisk there. It's kind of like the metric way or the English way. 2 different ways to address the same problems of identifying or communicating how big something is. So the first of them is the component method. The component method is where you focus on doing some calculations for each separate component, and thus the title. You can see the components listed here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. Useful life, remaining useful life cost. Find out how much, or set how much reserves are attributed to each one. Look at the difference, fund that over time, and you get the funding requirements. So it's a matter of doing some calculations across and then summing them down. Okay, so it's kind of a 2-step process: calculate across and sum down. The cash flow method is a little bit different. Again, it's the same components, exactly the same components, but you look at it in a different way. The first step is to lay them out over time. What are the expenses going to be? And you look at the annual totals. So you're looking at reserve expenses, not roofing or painting or pool or anything like that. You look at the reserve expenses, and then you provide the cash that is needed. You look at the annual reserve funding, find out, starting with the reserve balance, how much funds you need to put in, so you'll have enough money at the end of the year. You start the next year, and it's back and forth and back and forth. And you're looking at the cash flow for the association, not looking at it on a individual component by component basis. So the component method is calculations and equations. It's adding and subtracting and dividing, and it's each component individually. The cash flow method is you lay out the expenses and then you test and retest the funding that's required. It's not a direct mathematical solution. And we're looking at annual expenses, not individual projects, okay? So that's 2 different ways to look at the same set of expenses. Nothing different about expenses. Now, cash flow method is the preferred method. because fundamentally it uses association dollars more efficiently. They're not tucked away into different corners, assigned to different specific projects. It allows more funding plan flexibility, and I'll show you that later on. And the great result is it regularly results in lower funding requirements for the association. Okay, so what would be some good rules? And let's do some thinking, okay? You're there. What would be some good rules for reserve funding? Let's start out with my suggestion of have enough cash. Paige said that at the very beginning. Having enough cash to get the projects done. That seems like that would be a good rule. Do it so you have enough cash. Another would be kind of related, no special assessments. Let's have the cash set aside so we don't have to surprise our owners with a special assessment for something that deteriorated in plain sight over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. And how about another rule? Make sure everyone pays their fair share. So it's fair across the membership. Everyone pays their fractions along the way, so you don't get a new couple or a new owner that just moved in and they get hit for a special assessment for deterioration that happened long before they were there. That's really not fair. Or on the other hand, it's not fair for an owner to be paying low reserve funding for 20 years and then sell right before some expenses begin to hit. Now, the fourth one, and this is for condos, a good rule is to fund minimum 10% of budget towards reserves. Now, that comes from FHA requirements. It's been adopted by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac pretty much. And so your owners are going to get more favorable mortgage terms if the lenders can see that you're setting aside a minimum of 10% of budget. So that's just plain in the best interest of your owners. That's going to help your sales prices. And you may be scratching your head about that, but let me show you this chart. In 2021, we did a study of 2,000 reserve sites that we've done just for condo associations. And all but 3 of them, 1,997 of them, which is 99.85%, needed more than 10% of budget going to reserves. And you see this gray circle here, and you wonder, Robert, why are you showing us a gray circle? Well, that's a pie chart. And you can't even see the slice of associations that legitimately, condo associations that had legitimate reserve funding less than 10% of budget. It's just trivia. Actually, it's ridiculous. Those were 3 very significant exceptions, and so it's a good rule. That's what I want to communicate here. That if you're a condo association, start out with a minimum 10% of budget going to reserves. That's just going to serve you and the association well. Okay, then we get 2 more rule type things. Official rules that we deal with here in the reserve study industry are National Reserve Study Standards. First published in 1998. They've been updated a couple times, and they are, again, currently in revision at this point in time. Should be republished in about a month, I understand. But what we're looking at is the rules, the reserve funding principles, according to National Reserve Study Standards, are these 4 things. Having sufficient cash, having a stable contribution rate so you're not bumping things around with every painting project or roofing project or a pool project. It's evenly distributed and it's fiscally responsible. So the kind of things we were talking about a moment ago, the things you'd like to see is have enough cash, and you'd like everyone to pay their fair share. You'd like to be good for owners to get favorable mortgages, good for buyers to get favorable mortgages at your association, and everyone paying their fair share, things like that. Those are the good things, and they're very appropriately what we see in National Reserve Study Standards. So it's all aligning together, and these are the guiding principles, the tools and the rules guiding what we do. Now, I'll spend a few minutes at this point talking about the goals of a reserve funding plan. We'll do a little bit of the same thinking. What would be some good goals? All right? And whether it's a rule or a goal, I think it's a great goal. We just state it clearly. Have enough money. Have enough money to do the project that you need to do. All right? Sounds pretty simple. And don't get the board in trouble. That's a little bit like we said a moment ago with National Reserve Study Standards. Have it be fiscally responsible. So the board can stand on firm ground. And then how about a goal is don't make it more expensive than it needs to be. So let's have the money. Let's have it be a responsible plan. And let's have it be good for the homeowner. So it's looking at kind of three different things here. And one very important point that I want to remind you of is that it's not just your plan. So anytime you're talking about the goals of reserve funding, remember that's not all up to you. Mother Nature and Father Time get a vote, and they really don't care about your plan. They're going to do what they do with your building. And you don't get to complain. You don't get to veto what they do. It's just going to happen. So remember, it's not just your plan. So that means you need to have some kind of margin, all right? And then you get to the question, well, how much margin is good? How much margin is not enough? How much margin is too much? Again, you don't want to be collecting arguably too much money from your homeowners. And so since it's not a direct answer, let's look at the statistics. And here's a chart that some of you who've attended prior webinars might have seen. It's the National Special Assessment Risk. And we did this, the last official analysis we did was in 2021. So this is based on about 50 or 60,000 data points from our clients across the country. And you can see that when an association has a reserve fund that is closer to 0% funded, they have a higher risk of special assessment. No surprise. And when the reserve fund is strong, out here above the 70% level, really special assessments are incredibly rare. So what that tells us, statistically speaking, is that generally it's risky out here about not having enough cash because there's more special assessments, and the special assessments happen when there isn't enough cash. And it's pretty safe out here in this range. And that kind of gives us an idea of more or less trouble. Where do I need to be to have the cash to do what I want to do? Okay. And so we compare it to National Reserve Study standards. And National Reserve Study standards lists three funding goals. They call them baseline, threshold, and full funding. And if I'm going fast, remember this is going to be recorded. As Paige said, we're going to have an outline after the program that we'll send in about a week. So try to keep up, but no big deal. We'll be able to supply you with the information you need. Anyway, baseline funding is where your target is just keep the reserve balance above zero. Pretty simple, but remember, expenses are based on estimates, and Father Time and Mother Nature get a vote in your plan. So there's good reason to have a little bit of margin. And full funding is where the reserve balance, the cash in the bank, cash and savings, is equal to the deterioration around the association. So you're trying to offset the expenses of what has happened. So it's a little bit higher amount of cash in the bank. And threshold is something that you choose in between, either a cash amount or a percent funded amount. So the bottom line is baseline ends up being risky, and full funding is towards the safe end of things. And I can show you here, full funding is aiming at being at this 100% funded point where the deterioration at the association is balanced by cash in the bank. And baseline funding is saying, hey, let's just stay above zero. Anything above zero is good. But looking at this chart, you and I can see there's trouble when you're near zero. So you might be thinking, let's not do that. And as a golfer, that reminds me of this kind of a golf shot. If you're standing here and you're trying to hit your approach shot to the pin on the green here, it's safe if you aim for the fat part of the green. It's risky if you're trying to hit the ball real close because you bring the bunker into play and you bring the water hazard into play. And I'm telling you, if you are standing here saying, don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water, it's a pretty good chance you're going to hit it in the water because that's where your brain is going. You want to be aiming safe. And so that's what I want to encourage you to do. Aim safe. Don't bring too much risk into play because remember, as a board member or a manager, you're taking risks with other people's money and the enjoyment of their home. So don't do that. That's not what you're trying to accomplish here. So pick a safe target for your association. And also, when we're thinking about how much it's going to cost, and don't make it too expensive for your homeowners, do your planning ahead. This is what it costs to fund a $250,000 roof project. If you plan ahead with budgeted funding and you get a little bit of interest from the bank, all it takes from the homeowners is, call it $232,000. The bank is going to pay the rest to get you to $250,000. If right before you need to do the project, you take out a loan, it's a 7-year loan at current bank association lending rates, it's going to cost you about $320,000. So that's about 320 over 230. It's about $90,000, $88,000 more expensive for your homeowners if you take out a loan. So yeah, you can do loans, but they're expensive. So thinking about it, have enough money. Yeah, pick your target. Don't get the board in trouble. Pick something responsible, not too risky, and plan ahead. Don't make it more expensive than it needs to be. And now we'll get to a fun part of the program. I'm going to spend a few minutes showing some actual examples of developing a funding plan. And I have to be careful here because I can spend a lot of time on this. As I've done in other webinars, it's easy to demonstrate by using your online reserve calculator. You plan it. It's a $399 tool that comes free with all our professional reserve studies. So let me now drop the PowerPoint and call up my web browser. There we go. And I'm logged into our client center with a user profile that is as if you were a portfolio manager. We've got a number of properties here, and I did my practicing on the sample 5-building townhome, so let's pick that. You can see the reserve study here, user account management, and then you plan it. So you see the components here. It's just a long list. Don't worry about reading that. Control panel is starting balance, interest, inflation. Recommendations is where we do the fiddling around, the figuring out, and the tables and charts. So I want to show you for this association, we've given them an easy start. Not too many expenses in the early years, big expenses in the later years. And they are starting at about 70% funded. So we're going to start the demonstration a little bit easy here. So we've got an association with expenses downstream, and they have a pretty good starting point. You remember 70% is kind of the beginning of reserve fund strength. So if we pick a full funding solution, if you're taking notes, you can write down $4,990 per month. That's what it's going to cost. If we pick a baseline solution and look at this, this is going to tune into the 100% line. Pick baseline. It stays cash positive, but it's closer to zero. That's what it's trying to do. Trying to miss zero, trying to miss zero, trying to miss zero. And the funding here is $3,730. And that is about 25% less. Okay? And that's pretty typical. It's typically about a 20% difference, 15 to 20% difference between full funding and baseline funding. Remember, it's the same. Expenses haven't changed. You're just saying, do I just want to be above zero, or do I want to have a little bit of margin and insulate myself from special assessments? The point in that when you save money here in the reserve funding, you often make it up with a special assessment here, or here, or here, or all three. Once every 10 years special assessment. So again, the expenses are the expenses. There's no getting around that the roof is going to be what the roof is going to be. It's going to fail. All right, let's play around with some numbers. First thing I want to show you is the influence of the inflation. It was 3%. What do you say we pop it up to 4%? Save that. And we were at that baseline solution, and now you can see with higher inflation, that makes all these expenses bigger and taller. And you see the association now crashes and burns. So it was 3730. And now to be baseline funded, it's going to be 4450. And that is about a about a 19% difference, 20% difference. And that is typical. For a 1-point change in inflation, it's going to affect your funding by about 20+%. That's just the way it is. When all these expenses get bigger, even by a little bit, it's going to change your funding requirements a lot. And that's why we try to be real stable with the use of our inflation factors. We don't want to be too sensitive to inflation that's just going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4-year project and apply that same 8% or so inflation for 30 years. We have no expectation that's going to happen. Okay, so about a 20% change in reserve funding for every 1% change in inflation. Let's change that back to 3%, get back to kind of normal. And let's now change the interest from 1% up to 2%. Okay, so this is in the association's favor. And I wrote down that 37, no, I got too many numbers here. 3770, let's go baseline again. 3620, or a baseline solution, and at 1%, yeah, 3730 versus 3620, about a 3% difference. 6%, 5 or 6% is usually the difference of a single point change in interest, and that's because interest is fundamentally less influential, because interest is only earned on the actual cash that you have in the bank, whereas inflation works its, I want to say, ugly effect on all these expenses over 30 years, not just the cash that you have right now. Okay, so let's reset this to normal. And there we go. Now, what do you say we cause some trouble here? The big expenses are out here. We gave this association a pretty easy start. So there's a couple things that we can do. What do you say we reduce their cash? They're right now sitting at just under $300,000. That was 70% funded. Let's say these people at this association only have 50 grand in reserves. They are now 12% funded. So they're starting out at a weak position. And I've reset interest and inflation. So we're going to compare to the normal numbers. Full funding initially was $49.90 per month. And with a weaker starting position, it's now going to cost them $56.10 per month and a $40-some thousand special assessment, about $1,300 per unit. So with exactly the same expenses, the point is that when you have a weaker starting point, it's going to cost you more. You have more catching up to do. You're scared of upcoming expenses. And there's another way to skin the cat. If you're really weak, you say, hey, let's not worry about full funding in 25 or 30 years. Let's just worry about staying alive, getting the projects done. Now, notice that full funding looks kind of like baseline funding for the first 10 years. So if we do baseline, remember it's 56.10 here. What's baseline do? It knocks it up to 58.50. It's a little bit more, but the special assessment is less. So when you have a lot of expenses early and you're in a weak position, full funding doesn't really cost you a whole lot more because you got big trouble right out the gate. Okay? Let's see, what else can we do? You guys ready for more trouble? Let's make more trouble. What do you say we don't give them an easy start? What do you say we move the roof project to the initial year? So my notes, it's component 1300, 1303. Let's edit this and change it from being 7 years away to being immediate 0 years away. Okay, that's done. Let's take a look at it. Boom. Now they have a big roof project in that initial year. Looks a lot better out here, but now we've got what? Trouble. Because we've got a little over $100,000 of expenses in the first year. We're starting with 50 grand. And I hope you're all shaking your heads thinking, this association's in a hard way. So what's this mean? Higher monthly assessments and bigger special assessments. So let's see what is needed. For a full solver, and not surprising, a little over $100,000 special assessment to get them over that hump and to get them pushed enough, kind of like a rocket launch, to get them going, to get fully funded downstream. Or if all you're focusing on is staying alive, baseline solver, $100,000 special assessment, but still $5,600. That's more than full funding was when we had a strong starting point and when we weren't having a last-minute catastrophe for the roof imminently leaking. So those are a little bit of the options that we have here. You can see we have a few choices. We could do something we call the exercise plan, which is start it lower and steepen it up. So instead of 5,600, let's try maybe 3,600. And instead of it rising at 3% a year, let's boost it at 10% a year. So you can see it's steeper in the first few years. Oh, but they crash and burn. So that doesn't work. Let's try 4,000. Yeah, they barely make it. Okay? So there's different things we can do. If you're in a real jam and the problem is we can get through the roof project with an immediate special assessment, and maybe we can soften it for the owners by ramping them up for a few years to get them through this next big set of expenses. Different things we can do. And that's some of the things we can work with when we're dealing with cash flow funding. All right? So what I want to say is your starting point matters. The mixture, the blend of your expenses matters. Interest and inflation matters. Your funding goal matters if you're trying to be conservative. But again, for some associations, we're just trying to keep you alive, just trying to get you so you have enough cash to get you through the upcoming projects. So there's some of the things in the mix. Let's get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, right where we were. Looking at the clock, now it's time to summarize and bring this subject of breaking down reserve funding plans together into some lessons that you can take away. So, some things I want to leave you with. Cash flow methodology is always going to be better. It's more flexible. You saw me working with it there. It uses your cash more efficiently, and for the majority of associations, it's going to result in a lower funding requirement. And that's because when the association is in catch-up mode, you have a little squishy ability to share the cash between components there. And we have a webinar called Reserve Studies 103. You want to see us walk through this with a lot more time, go look for Reserve Studies 103 on our website or on YouTube. And you need to appreciate that some associations are more expensive to maintain than others. You can't always do a direct comparison. Expenses are going to be different. The financial starting point is going to be different. The funding goal is going to be different. Maybe they're not getting as much interest as you are. Maybe they're getting more interest than you are. All those kinds of factors are going to come into play that makes it difficult to compare, well, why are they paying more or less into reserves than we are? What's important is what's right for your association. And do appreciate that Mother Nature and Father Time are real and they don't negotiate. When it's time for your roof to fail, your roof is going to fail. And that's a deterioration bill that needs to be paid. You can see that coming. Do it over time so everyone pays their fair share. The board's job is to budget for the needs of the association. Appreciate that. The board's job is not to try to keep the assessments as close to last year as possible. That's a game that's doomed to failure. So success is not found by having inadequate cash, which results in trashing everyone's home values and increasing board liability. Increasing board liability because they're failing to budget for the needs of the association. And this may be, given the poll that we did at the very start, one of the most important slides I have here. For board members and managers, do your job. Tell the owners how much it costs to live there. We see it all the time. If you ever go to a new car lot, you'll see stickers on the windows that say, these are your expectations. You can see this is a big rig. Might be let's say a GMC, so what's that make it, a Suburban? But it doesn't get a lot of miles per gallon. Deal with the truth. Tell the owners how much it costs to live there, and they can decide if the association suits them or not. You have a responsibility to run the affairs of the association and tell people what the costs are going to be, okay? And so I want to leave you with the thought, update your reserve study, get the accurate information, get the updated information you need so you can make those decisions and then decide. Give your association the cash it needs. The leverage that applies is incredible. When your association has the cash it needs, property values are strong. Property values are measured in thousands of dollars. Reserve funding is typically measured in tens or hundreds of dollars. So that's the leverage, that's the wisdom. And that brings me to the end of my prepared content for today. I want to leave you with the idea that we have a deep library of resources at our website, reservestudy.com, all based on doing reserve studies now for 36, coming on 37 years. We have a very informative book, easy to read, lots of illustrations, stories. It's called Understanding Reserves. It's available on Amazon, and you can download Chapter 1 for free from our website if you want to get a taste. And just a reminder, UPlanet is that sandbox tool that we provide for all our professional reserve study clients. If you're not a client of Association Reserves, you can subscribe at $399 a year. Work with your reserve plan. Figure out what works. Figure out what crash and burn is. And also you can help guide your association safely and successfully to the future. If you like what you see, there's, again, a large library of resources we have on YouTube, webinars, webinar breakdowns, little short explanation type videos. Look for them, search for them, give them a like, and subscribe to our channel. And that's not even talking about next month when Paige, I believe, will have a guest expert talking about inflation and investments, how to maximize your reserve funding. So at this point in time, let me turn the microphone over to Paige, who will handle our Q&A time together.